Well, welcome to the adult class. I'm Victor Nelson, and I've had an interesting career as a Lutheran pastor, and then began doing more counseling and moved into pastoral counseling, marriage and family therapy. And after, I'm going to say 23 years in ministry, I made the full-time shift to counseling and doing work for my synod office in Denver, and then doing mediation, church consulting, church fundraising. And so when Harry asked me if I would be open to doing a class on trauma, I was thinking, oh, good, Harry. Wanted to take that. Now, we just had a moment of trauma. And I told Harry I was going to tell him about the exercise I was going to do, but we didn't have a moment to do it. So I hope your heart is okay. And sure what's going on with you? Okay, so what about you? So when Henry asked me to do the class on trauma, it's like, wow, I've worked with so many clients as well as churches that have been in trauma. Some of my church consulting occurred when there were clergy misconduct, where churches were splitting over issues. Sometimes the political divisions within congregations. And so trauma is not just something that affects us individually. It affects communities, whole cities, whole countries. My first exposure to understanding trauma was when I was in the early stages of dating a girl in high school who has become my wife. So when we started getting acquainted, we knew each other in 7th grade, but we never talked until senior year in high school, because she was the smart person, and I was one of the athletes. And so she and I were in a class. I got injured in track. She was working on a play. And so we started talking in class, and then I would hang out in the sound booth where she was doing setups and stuff. And in our early dating, we went to one of those places that teenagers go to make out. And it was on a bluff. This is back in Iowa. Yes. Okay, I got you sidetracked, sorry. And down below the bluff, there was a train track. And so we're in the car, we just get kind of acquainted, and we hear the train whistle, and my wife goes catatonic. Absolutely faints. And it's like, oh my gosh. And I'm kind of holding her, and I can't wake her up. And after a few minutes, she kind of like, oh, I didn't know it, but 2 years earlier, she had been in an accident with a train. And the train whistle triggered her right back to that trauma. I didn't know anything about trauma back then. And over the years, that reaction has dissipated and then disappeared. She's doing fine, even when we have to stop for a train. But I want to use that as a touchstone for talking about how trauma, Harry mentioned it this morning, and the history of our trauma can hold on to us. So I'm gonna see if this works. Come on. There we go. So this is not trauma, but it is trauma. This represents about 1,000 atomic bombs this last week with the solar flares that ended up hitting our atmosphere. We live out in the county. And so on Thursday evening, we have a friend over from dinner. He and his wife will be moving here from Minnesota this summer. And we went out to try to see the comet. Well, it was a little bit, we couldn't find it, couldn't see it. And so as we turn around to walk back to the house, three of us turned to our left to go back to the house. And my wife turned to her right, and she goes, "Oh my God, what's that?" It was the aurora borealis. And we started taking pictures. This is right here in Santa Fe. And y'all missed it, right?
Yeah, we didn't turn the right way.
Yeah, you didn't turn the right way. So I was thinking, heavenly objects, the trauma of this horrific storm, that if we were halfway between here and the sun, it would have destroyed us. But in the midst of that horrific storm, something beautiful appeared. Can trauma and moving through trauma be something that we can end up with something beautiful? So early in my training, I did a 1-year clinical pastoral education for my internship in seminary as a hospital chaplain. And one of my supervisors, as we talked about grief, used the example of a comet's orbit. That grief can kind of capture us, like trauma can capture us. And, you know, we kind of circle around it in a tight orbit. But comets gradually develop the elliptical orbit. We move away from the grief. We can move away from the trauma. But then the train whistle pulls us right back around the trauma. Any little thing. My daughter lost her partner the year after we bought our houses together. So in 2016, my wife and I sold our house in town. Stacy and Mary sold their house in town. We bought a house together to do co-housing. And it's been fabulous. Stacy's partner, Mary, the year after we moved in, 45 years old, diagnosed with colon cancer. January, passed away right at Thanksgiving, same year. Yesterday, I saw a woman. It's like, dang, it looks like Mary. Now, I'm back around the trauma, the grief. Now, I can move beyond that because we had such a lovely time together, a very powerful departure from this world. We were with her when she passed on. We saw her pass. She didn't die. She passed on. So keep this image of the comet and the orbit in mind as we go through some things for today. So when we take up trauma, the little trick with the empty cup of water, we go through normal stress responses almost every day, probably. And by the way, this is a great way to cure hiccup. I have a family doing family counseling with a teenager back in Indiana where I was practicing. And the boy had hiccups. And my office happened to have a sink and a counter. I said, "Oh, let me get you a glass of water." So I got a cup, ran the water, went over to him, tripped. Cup was empty. But he went, his hiccups were gone. But that's my secret. If you use it. A normal stress response. Our bodies react. We can't think through a reaction. You didn't have time to think. It was just, boom.
I don't know what you were doing.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it was a shock. A normal stress response to anything that upsets the ordinary, the common. And so we all go through that. Beyond that, an acute stress, witnessing a car accident, being in a car accident. I've been in one when I was 22 years old. And it still causes me to be cautious at certain points. And then I had the occasion this spring, once in April, once in May, to witness accidents. One on Rufina and one on the 599 frontage road. Both times a driver ran a red light, another driver the second time ran a stop sign. Smack right in. I stayed to help people, other people stopped to help the passengers, make sure everybody was okay. We called 911, the police came. Acute stress disorders. What the official terminology is post-traumatic stress syndrome. It affects us at a pretty deep level. Those intersections now, and other intersections here in Santa Fe, like, okay, the lights turned green, but I am still looking because I saw it happen right in front of me. Can a trauma make us better in some way, more alert? Can we pay attention better if we witness something like that and we learn from it? When we get into the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, now we're looking at a clinical diagnosis where the stress is pervasive, the memories have taken over, people can't get back to the ordinary life functioning. And we see that so much. I've got a friend who's the director of behavioral health at the vet center in Albuquerque. And she works primarily with the homeless vets. And these people have been so traumatized by what they've witnessed, and they don't have a chance, they haven't had the chance until they come to her and her staff to start really processing. How do you move through this? How do you move beyond it? The acute stress disorder is something that is more like it happens, and typically within a month or so, you kind of take a breath, you're back on track. The post-traumatic stress disorder, those experiences tend to appear after a month, the symptoms and the problems, and then they exacerbate. So if you can't hold a steady job, how do you stay connected with the family, support the family? Okay, so if you can't hold on to your family, do you have friends? If you can't have friends, you know, now what? And life crumbles. It falls apart. We all know time heals all wounds, right? And when I heard that from clergy. It's like, you may be grieving now, funeral service, memorial service, but remember, time heals all wounds. No, it doesn't. It's what you do with your time that can be healing. Okay? So, well, I kind of already talked about some of these kinds of things. Harry, you mentioned some of this where people may be facing ongoing hunger. Jesus, as a Galilean, and his immediate disciples from Galilee, That was one of the poorest parts of Israel. People were always hungry. They faced hunger every day. And they had this authoritarian rule of Rome and Roman soldiers that said, hey, you do this right now, you carry this for me. You had to obey it. The trauma of not having personal autonomy or freedom. The prolonged misfortune, disadvantages. Sadly, in my career, I've worked with clients who were victims of prolonged sexual abuse. That is very, very challenging to heal and work through. My counseling center in Utah specialized in treating violent offenders. So we got court-ordered clients, primarily men, but not always. And it was challenging. Take them through a 6-month treatment program and kind of see some hopes that maybe this is going to change, maybe it'll be better for this guy. But you never really knew if there was a deep personal change. And then we had a couple of therapists that said, we should be treating the children who witnessed the violence. We were the first agency in Utah and one of the first in the country that developed treatment programs for children who witnessed the violence in families. We tried to head off that trauma, that deep embedded trauma at an early age with these young children. One of the things that helped, we drew people from the Utah State University music therapy department. And so these folks also worked with the art therapists and the children and their parents and used music to kind of do their healing, to tell their story. And one of the most impressive things was a group, we had a separate group for parents where the music therapists had the parents talk to their children. We never recorded it. It was so powerful and so beautiful that parents could then help the children move beyond that trauma. Grief, bereavement, loss, that often is kind of a situational thing. We lose a friend, a neighbor, but then the closer that the person is to us, a family member, a spouse, a child. When I was working in chaplaincy back in West Virginia, I learned that the divorce rate of parents who lose a child is extremely high. The other second highest moment for divorce is when the last child leaves home, because parents go, who are you now? Do we want this? But the trauma of losing a child, one of the deepest pains, anyone can go through. So these are the types of trauma that we're talking about when we start thinking about how do we face and address trauma in our lives, in our families' lives, in our community, in our parishes.
Just one thing.
Yes, yeah.
Just the loss.
Now what have I done?
You stopped the sharing.
I did. Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that. See, I shocked you this time.
Come on, baby.
Here I am. Okay. And just to also add to the list, a loss of a pet. I'm finding out more and more people are just as traumatized losing a pet as they have.
Amen. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, because one of the therapists in our practice in Indiana, but you don't have the geography and the timing. So I mentioned West Virginia, that was my chaplaincy internship, 1972, 73. Indiana was where we were living. My wife was a professor at Purdue. I was doing pastoral counseling residency and then a private practice. One of the women in our practice group specialized in pet therapy for that very reason. That when you lose a pet, that's a deep loss. When my daughter lost her partner, they had a dog together, and Kanan became such a comfort for my daughter. Kanan would curl up beside Mary as she was going through horrific cancer treatment and just be her support dog. And then, speaking of dogs, man, that is great timing.
It's like you were standing outside the door.
My compliments to the stage manager. Yeah, you're exactly on time. We're talking about the trauma of losing a pet. And I was just sharing that my daughter, when she lost her partner, retained Kanan, the dog. But then in March this year, had to put Kanan down. And so that was a deep, deep loss, because losing Kanan was all the memories of losing Mary. And one way we did this, because we've got a couple of acres out in the county, we buried Kanan on our property. Who needs the love today? And we created a memorial garden, and we're going to be doing little fairy garden things just as a memorial garden for Kanan. Yeah. So not only is the loss of a pet a deep grief, a deep trauma, pets can also be part of the healing of people who go through trauma, who are really struggling with grief and loss. So thank you for bringing the pups in. So I want to introduce an idea, post-traumatic growth, PTG, because people tend to focus on the problems. My training in the last 25 years, almost 30 years, has been solution-focused grief therapy, short-term therapy. But the idea of solution-focused, again, you've nailed it in your sermon, Terry, with the idea of the class you took, writing the story of your future. How did you frame that?
And just future story,
Future
without
story.
any barriers.
Yeah. So it's like what we would typically do when somebody comes into the office would be like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how optimistic are you today that you're going to find some answers in our work together? Well, I have people that say, yeah, about a 2. Really? Wow, what does a 2 look like? What makes it a 2? What keeps it from being a 1? You build on the positives wherever people are at. I did a class in Taiwan, 2 high school classes I spoke to, and I had them scale their self-confidence, teenagers, juniors and seniors in high school. Because in my work in youth ministry and in family therapy, working with a lot of youth, I identified that self-confidence is one of the most critical factors in how these young people move forward through the rest of their high school years into whatever's next. So I had the students scale. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you? Well, most of the students are like, no, maybe a 4, maybe a 5. One student was like 6. And in that culture, there's a big emphasis on studying and school. And why do my folks make me study all the time? How come I have to go to summer classes? They sent me all kinds of questions. I couldn't answer all the questions, but I focused on self-confidence. And as we talked about self-confidence, think about this for yourself. This will be a chance for you to share something. What gives you self-confidence? Just one or two things that come to mind. Doesn't matter where you're at. You might be at a 10, you might be at a 1, but what gives you confidence? Yes.
Previous successes.
There you go. So you've had other successes, and so you've got a level of self-confidence based on that. Great. Yes.
Feedback.
Say more about that.
Well, if I get a compliment for
Yeah.
something I've done, yeah, I swell up with it.
Yeah. So getting the perspective of somebody else, pointing out something you've done well, it's like, ooh. Now I can incorporate that. I can internalize it. Thank you. What else? Okay, that is the extrovert time of the class. Now for the introvert. Yes.
I think having a little belief in yourself. I mean, that's a self-confidence, but some kind of belief that you can maybe step outside of.
Yeah. It's like I might be moving into something I haven't done before, but
Willing.
I'm willing to try. I might have, willing to risk, but I can believe in myself.
But that's kind of
Yeah.
self-confidence, I guess. That's
Well,
kind of
but
great stuff.
that's still, yeah. Thank you.
Security,
In what way? When you say security?
I'm safe. I'm safe where I am, I'm safe
yeah.
for what I'm doing.
Yeah. And so having that kind of way of thinking, we apply that to the work of trauma. And it's like, so what has helped you get through other difficult times in life? I was talking to my wife about that, and I was asking her, I didn't remember some of the details. I said, when you had that accident with Jane, how did you actually get through all of that stuff? She said, well, I had a lot of support from family. That's one of the most important things in dealing with trauma. I had social support because she was part of a group, they called it a potluck group. Her girl friends in high school, there were 6 or 8 of them, would meet monthly for a potluck together. And they continued that tradition up until about, pre-COVID, where they would not meet monthly, but annually. So they would come together from different parts of the country and have a few days of potlucking, having that social support. And so as you think about post-traumatic growth, these are some of the factors where we can actually gain some personal strength. How does a challenge make us stronger? Well, if we can get through this part of it, I've accomplished something, or I get some feedback. Wow, you're doing really well with this. What makes that so good for you? And the post-traumatic growth focuses on what we appreciate about our life. And what is it we would like for our life tomorrow, or next week, or next year? We have a chance for what the people in the field call a chance for a rebirth of self. Okay, if this trauma has knocked you down, well, when you get up, what's the person you would like to be? How do we move toward that? How do we redefine what's important in our lives? And I have to credit so many people, not just in mental health, but in the theological, spiritual circles, a greater sense of purpose. You know, that if we have a sense of doing something important, significant, that sense of purpose, it can really help us move forward, move out of dark time. My wife had mentioned this, the intimacy, the emotional support with partners and family members, and developing compassion for others. We in the faith communities, we want to say yes, compassion, love, kindness. Those are all things that help people move through trauma. And can we tap into creativity? In that music therapy context of working with children who have witnessed violence, helping kids write songs. It helps them tap creativity. It's like, wow, we wrote a song today, you know? And then our own spiritual growth. Can we find a connection to our source of being? That we can find that anchor in the spiritual aspect of our life. So some of the, yes,
It's
please.
just, just thinking about, some of the outline and things you're talking about and confidence. And I remember somebody early in when I was just starting to work in a career, and somebody said, we were talking about public speaking, they said, the people in the audience, they want you to do well.
Yeah,
Like, oh,
yeah, really.
like they're wanting you to do well.
Yeah.
That's kind of like takes away
Yeah.
some of the fear. And the other thing he said, when you go for an interview, they actually want to talk to you. Like they want to see the best from you. They
Yeah.
want you to do well.
Yeah.
Like they want people. So they want you to do well. Like, wow,
And-
that's going to give you some confidence.
And to be able to be that person who can reach out and connect. I remember one of the experiences we had in China. We had tell me about time. I don't have.
Well, it's 10:28 now,
And so we got to wrap up.
at 10:45.
Oh, okay. So we're doing good then.
Yeah.
In China, we were doing some touring. My wife was doing a lot of training in China. And so one afternoon we were touring a large, I don't know what, square. And there was an elderly man using a pointed sponge and like a sponge on a broomstick and a big 5-gallon thing of water. And he was drawing caricatures of people. So he had an audience of probably 30 or 40 people watching him, and he would just, point to somebody's up and do it. And so he would get done, and it was like, it was so amazing to watch him. And then he turns around and he sees somebody from not China. He hands me the broomstick. I'm like, what? I'm not an artist, I don't draw. I saw a boy who was Down syndrome. He was probably 7 or 8 years old. The one thing I can do is draw the number 2. Right? And turn it into a goose. And so I helped the boy. You have a question. I don't have a chalkboard, sorry. We don't have a whiteboard, do we? I'll show you after class. But you draw the number 2, and now you've got the head, the neck, the back, and the top of the tail feathers. And then you come down below for the breast, back up the neck, and the beak. And so I helped this boy draw the number 2. And so he drew a number 2 next to mine. And then I drew the bottom and turned it into the goose. And then he did his, turned it into the goose. And the people just went wild. And you talk about the feedback, compliments. They were not applauding me, they were applauding this boy who now, I don't know, the rare times in his life had applause. Can we be the ones to reach out connect with people that are strangers, you don't even know them. If somebody handed you the broomstick with the sponge, now what do you do? We've been given challenges, sometimes traumatic experiences, sometimes deep trauma, the PTSD stuff. What are we going to do with that? Can we turn it into something? All right. So now I want to go back to the comment, because the post-traumatic growth is what allows us to move beyond the trauma experience. Okay, we become the comet that is now able to move away from the trauma that has held us. Now, I'll be the first to say, if you or somebody you know is dealing with deep trauma, mental health professional will be the way to go. Get signed up with a therapist and use that therapy process to help unravel all of the stuff that goes on, and then help you start moving forward as you claim a life that you want to have. But this idea of the post-traumatic growth, I'm tying it together. We didn't get to see the comet, but that's why I decided to use the comet image. Is that as we work through the trauma, as we work through the stressors in our lives, it allows us to move farther and farther away in that elliptical orbit. And then guess what? Well, there's an election in 4 weeks. Boom. We might be back around the trauma experience. I've never been this worried about an election in my life. I think no matter who is elected, there will be eruptions of violence. The hate that has been nurtured is going to become more overt. I can't tell you how many friends and family members I've talked to say, okay, where else can we live besides the US? I was in Germany, and my wife and I went to a conference, and we were touring some of the Lutheran areas, Wittenberg, where he posted 95 theses. And there was a gift shop there. This is 2016. And it had a t-shirt. I wish I had bought it. Make America Great Britain again. People in Europe have a sense of humor about the United States. But I think that the trauma of our election, I think people are living with that anticipatory, how are we going to respond to this? Do we get rid of our cell phones? Do we quit watching the news? Do we remain oblivious to what's going to happen? Or do we prepare ourselves? Because the things that help us get through the trauma, community, connection, building a more creative life, finding the spiritual roots, that's what's going to get us through whatever we have to face with the election. I'll have these details in a handout at the end of class you may take with you. Yes, please. Yep.
I'm trying to understand the significance here. So you have the comment going around the trauma experience. As it comes down to the clear part, does that mean you're free of the trauma, but ultimately you're going to have to revisit it again?
Not necessarily. You're getting free from the trauma. The end of the elliptical orbit is a trigger event that pulls us back in. So for my wife, the train whistle. She kind of moved beyond. She had the family support, the social support. She was a couple years past the accident. And then in this quiet little park above the train tracks, she hears the whistle, boom, for a little bit of time, 5 or 10 minutes, she's back around the trauma. But then the orbit gets back to the ellipse. So the trigger event, seeing somebody on the bus that reminds me of Mary or, whatever. Yes.
You know, I've known several people who have lost pets,
Yeah.
and then they say they are never going to have another pet. And that is appropriate response, and I've also known women, a couple of sisters who survived the Holocaust,
Oh,
and they said they were never going to have children, and they didn't.
Yeah.
Because the world was such a dangerous place.
yes, exactly.
So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
lost pets.
Yeah.
But then I always thought someday I'm gonna have another pet.
Yes, right.
Because there's so many animals who need our.
Yes,
help.
exactly.
But is it appropriate to say I'm gonna stay away from any possible future trauma by never
Not-
repeating that experience?
If I never love, then I'll never be hurt.
Right.
That kind of thing. And my daughter's in that mode right now. I miss my dog. I see dogs, I want to love them, but I'm not sure I can take one yet. So she hasn't said no. It's like, not yet,
Yeah.
not now. Think of it in another way of approaching this. I work a lot with divorcing people, and sadly, a lot of divorces happen because there's an affair. Somebody gets involved with somebody at work. No. When I'll just share the story. My friend Skip went through divorce, and he said he called me to his office about 3 months after the divorce. This is Park City, Utah, and he said, "I think I need a little help. I'm getting phone calls from all these women who want to know if I'm ready to date." And he said, "When I grew up, the boys called the girls to date. Why are they calling me?" And I said, "Well, it's a good question because, you're young, you're athletic, you're good looking, you're rich as hell. I don't know why women would be interested in you." And so he kind of laughed and he said, "Yeah, but what should I do?" I said,
Go
"Number
after
one,
the monkey normal.
well, not quite.
No.
I said, date. It's okay to date, but don't date exclusively yet. Date a lot of people. Find out, different relationships, the way different people interact with you, and things you like about people, the way you work as a relationship, and tell the people you're dating you're not going to be exclusive. The other thing to say is, I'm not going to be thinking about marriage for 2 years. Really? I guess I can do that. So I played in a golf tournament with him 3 months later. I said, "So how's the dating thing going?" He said, "Well, it's been kind of interesting because I've enjoyed some of these women, but when I tell them I'm not going to date exclusively, I'm not going to think about marriage, they don't want to go out with me anymore." I said, "That's telling you something, isn't it?" Fast forward, just under 2 years from the divorce, he said, "I met somebody and it's going pretty well, and it's been 2 years. You think it's okay to get married?" And I said, "Look, you dated a lot of people over the last 2 years. You found somebody that you really click with. I'd say do it." He goes, "Oh, good. Are you available in 2 weeks to do our wedding?" And they've been together now for 20 some years. But my point is about the pets, about marriages. When people go through a loss, a divorce, the loss of a pet, you need some time. You need some time to figure things out. And when you give yourself that time, especially in relationships, then people who wait 2 years post-divorce, have higher successes in their marriage than first marriages. Yeah, because they figured out. They left a relationship that wasn't working for either of them. And they had a chance to really sort out kind of thing that they really want in a relationship. They find somebody, now they're able to make a better, stronger, maybe more mature commitment. Maybe we have to do another class on marriage and divorce. Okay, we're getting close to the end. I just wanted to give you another look at a different scene from the Aurora Borealis. And that's what we've done today. Are we good on time?
It is, yeah, 5 minutes.
5 minutes. So any comments or questions? Yes, please.
There seems to be a lot of research going on now that with the Holocaust issue, that it is now multi-generational. In
Yes.
other words, even great-great-great-grandchildren who basically never experienced anything
right.
near it are still somehow
Yeah.
experiencing that Holocaust.
Sure. Yep. So there is a such thing in family therapy. We look at systemic generational patterns in family. And when I work with families about issues like addiction, violence, I say, and it's not original to me, it's one of the experts in the field from the 80s. It only takes 3 generations to change a pattern. Only 3. But it takes one person. And I use my story. My father grew up in a very violent family, and his father died when he was 14. My father was moderately abusive with his punishment, with my brother and me in particular. So that when my wife and I had children, here we are. My dad's father violent, my dad somewhat violent. Now I have to learn how to do it differently. And our kids were 3 and 1, 4 and 2, 4 and 2, I think. And we're at my parents' mobile homes. And my dad is in the kitchen, my mom, my wife, and I are in the living room, and the kids are running back and forth on the long hall. And they run up into the kitchen, and I hear my grumpy father say, "You kids settle down." And the kids just laughed and tore down the hallway. They tore back. "I thought I told you to settle down." They laughed, tore down the hallway, come back in the kitchen. "You want me to take my belt off?" I am out of my chair, already headed to the kitchen, and my son goes, "Grandpa, if you take your belt off, your pants will fall down." And then I knew the 3-generational pattern had been changed. My son had no concept of what that meant. Yeah. But the same with, the trauma. Oh my God, family, racial, religious, cultural trauma of the Holocaust. Yeah, those families carry that. And part of what keeps the trauma in that family system pattern is the ways of coping. You tell the story. Remember, we can't forget, it keeps people connected. And maybe some of that's okay because we have to remember it so that it doesn't happen again. But yes.
Well, there was some indication that therapists have discovered that it could be the great-grandchildren, and they never even knew that the Holocaust existed, but they were, it's like it was a genetic thing.
Yeah. I wouldn't say genetic, because I think that we're more products of our context. But it is almost like it's so embedded in that family system pattern. Yeah. Please.
What about the relationship between generational trauma and generational poverty?
I think there's a connection, and we made reference to Galilee, Jesus and his followers. That was generational poverty, and that does create that trauma, like I'm stuck, I can't do anything to change my situation. I worry about it, I'm stressed about it. It detracts from my day-to-day activities, my life. So yes, the generational poverty can be some of that generational trauma.
Can that also be their comfort level? I mean, some people are comfortable dealing with their trauma. And give an example, Habitat for Humanity.
Right.
Building a home in a high area,
Yeah.
high expensive area. It's not a comfort level.
Right.
I mean, very rarely survive that. They want to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
So that
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I think there might be some of that. Right. We want to find an area that feels more like where we fit, where we belong. Yeah. But yeah, we have a calling, to quote here, as followers of the divine, however we think of that, to somehow bring compassion and kindness, love, justice, mercy into the world. That helps heal our trauma if we can get into that mode, and it helps heal the trauma of the people that we encounter. So, whew, may all of your traumas be mild or something like this. Wait,
This is a slightly on topic, so forgive me, but I can't come to an understanding of why are we seeing worldwide low birth rates? Why are kids choosing
oh,
not to get into a relationship or not wanting
yeah,
to have babies?
I was adjunct faculty at Southwestern College here for 4 or 5 years. And these young students, it's like, I'm not bringing a kid into this world. They were so stressed about how dysfunctional, how marginalizing our culture and the attitudes can be. Some of them came from, trauma in their own families growing up. They didn't want to bring kids knowing what kind of parents they might be. But I think a lot of young people just are feeling like, I don't know if this world is gonna even survive whatever. Yeah, my daughter made an intentional choice as a young adult not to have children. So here she is in her 50s and not regretting her decision. She had a lot of dogs and a number of cats.
But it seems like it's almost a worldwide.
It is, yeah. I think it's
Japan.
because it's happening.
Trying to get their kids.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because the birth rate. I knew a woman here in Santa Fe who was a grad student at St. John's. She was from China. She was a secret daughter. She and her family lived in Western China. Her father was a professor, offered a position at Beijing University. He turned it down because the secret daughter was living with the grandparents. The other child was living with parents. And it was like, now China's changed that policy. But she said, I'm a secret daughter. I had never heard that term when I was. Yeah.
So what do you do about your anxious feelings about what's going on?
Oh, I should have talked more about this. The things that help. Making sure you're doing all of the, get your rest, eat well, exercise. Men, we are the slaggards here because when we have a trauma response, it takes us longer to metabolize those brain chemicals. The cortisol, the adrenaline. Women they don't excrete as much of those hormones, and so they can get calm much more quickly. Men, it takes longer, and exercise is so important. Some research that was done back in the 80s compared people who went to the gym with people who didn't, but they did the same exercise. So people who would go to the gym, walk or jog around the track versus people who would jog or walk in the neighborhood or out on the trail. People who rode stationary bikes versus people who rode bikes outside. People who swam laps versus people who went to the lake or the pond to swim. The people who were outside had greater depression, recovery, and resistance. They were doing the same exercise. But I can move from this point to this point on my own power. If I'm on a stationary bike, all I'm doing is pedaling, I'm not getting anywhere.
I'm watching CNN.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. But if I can move, you know, someplace where I want to go, and I can do it on my own power and come back, that's empowering. It makes us more resistant. So thank you for bringing that up. You know, being with friends, talking with friends, let me get the hand up to you, because that way, people who meditate, actually, it has been done like they do in high school. And you can have exercises for the chair. But the idea is, oh, did I get enough? One more.
Just one more.
All right, yeah. For people who meditate, they use mindfulness, who have spiritual practices, that can be so helpful. I'm out of the picture, sorry.
Oh, okay.
People who use mindfulness, meditation, spiritual practices, that can be so helpful dealing with a trauma, or even some of those moments, you know. My apologies if I got your time wet, but oh, I didn't have any water.
No, that's right.
And maybe you did. So thank you for saying that. You have to do the class here.
Next week, Carolyn Rahr is continuing a college
Thanks to both that soul
series.
I hope you did that. I hope you did.
You guys, topic.
All right.
Okay.